Welcome, everyone, to Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper. For those of you not familiar with the show, my guests and I will cover every angle of real estate under the sun, from interest rates to the economy to what's happening in Washington. Anything that affects our local real estate market here in the D.C. metro area will be covered here. If you got credit issues, you can call me. If you want to refinance to the lowest rates in U.S. history, call me. I've got the right company for you. If you got questions regarding short selling your home, whether foreclosure, if you're contemplating whether a foreclosure is in your future and you're trying to find a way to avoid that, we can help you out with that. You've got the questions and I've got the answers. Make sure you join us every Monday at WNEW 1580 AM from 2 to 3 p.m. in the afternoon. And call in with any questions that you may have. It's an off-air number. It's 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030, or you can reach out via the web at realestate360live.com. That's realestate360live.com. On there, there's a Ask a Question button on the right-hand side. Feel free to send me any emails with any questions that you may have. Remember, if it's real estate, it's covered here. We have a great show lined up for you guys today. Today, joining me on our panel is Louis Cammarosano, who's the general manager of HomeGain. Louis is often cited in the media as an industry expert in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, CNN Money, Fox Business, Smart Money, MSN, and numerous others. We're going to discuss with you about what happened in the markets last week, as well as what's on deck this week that could affect you and your real estate decisions. Louis, how you doing, buddy?
All right. Yourself, Ryan?
I'm doing well, Louis. Good having you on. I want to jump right into, obviously, the big market mover last week was the jobs report. And, you and I, over the course of probably the last 6 months or so, have been saying that it seems like they're really just skewing these numbers however they see fit to make it look like or paint a picture that's not really realistic for what the overall situation of the economy is and the state of the economy right now. On Friday, which was the non-farm payroll report, it was a big miss. They were expecting, I believe it was, 200,000 jobs?
Goldman had 200. Some people had 250.
Yeah, some people had 250. So it was a big miss coming in at 120,000. But the interesting part about that report was that they actually said that the unemployment rate had actually dipped down from 8.3% to 8.2%. And, you had sent me a note as well, along with another article that actually had showed that, that's great that, the unemployment rate dropped, but the actual number of people that were actually looking for a job dropped by 164,000. So those people that stopped looking for a job are not counted in this actual calculation. Thus, the participation rates of adults that are actually out there is ridiculous. I think the number of people in the labor force that is not in the labor force at this point is 87,897,000, which is an astounding number. Wouldn't you agree, Louis?
Right, and that's the number that increased. So when you take those people out of the labor force and you add in the jobs that were created, it looks like the unemployment rate went down, when in fact you have more people out of work than ever before, not in the labor force. They don't necessarily count them as unemployed.
Right.
They just decide that they're not in the labor force.
Which doesn't make any sense at all, I mean, and why this is so important to, real estate in general, is they try to paint this rosy picture. The stock market's up, to 13,000 and everything's going just quite rosy. That's not the truth. The majority of a lot of these transactions that are taking place right now are not people that are willing and able to take advantage of these low interest rates and obtain home loans. They're investors. They're people in large hedge funds and corporations that have cash on hand that can actually take advantage of the opportunities that are out there right now.
Right, and there's a disconnect between the companies doing well and the consumer. If you look at the stock market, a lot of the stock market increase is due to companies having cash and buying back their own stock.
Right.
Also, because companies are in a different situation than consumers, they didn't rack up a lot of debt during the housing crisis. Their consumers did. So consumers don't have the money right now to buy the products from the companies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the corporations are in beautiful position. I mean, just take Apple, for example, where they're now issuing a dividend, but they were sitting on large amounts of cash for an extended, probably the last 5 years or so.
And also, they say a good portion of the gains in the S&P is attributable solely to Apple's rise.
Right. Yeah, I mean,
the stock market isn't as in great a shape as one might believe due to the Apple overperformance and also due to companies buying back their own shares, which in a sense increases the stock price.
Yeah, and I mean, it's always interesting because within the market, there's always going to be companies that thrive even when the rest of the economy is not doing well. Apple is definitely one of those peak performers, but there's for every one Apple, there's probably 20 others that are struggling, and they've gained such a large market share over a percentage of time. It seems like that everybody's kind of riding on their coattails. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, it seems like just a person that's not very familiar with the stock market, they kind of look and see Apple, which is, just that big brand that's out there right now. And it's like, ooh, if they're doing well, I guess everybody else is.
So, they're an exception. And also, one could make the argument that you hear about gold and silver being overvalued, but that Apple, one could make an easy argument that that's overvalued. But you don't hear that constantly. That company's worth $600 billion right now.
Right.
And it's doubled in the last year.
Yeah. It's incredible. It's just mind-boggling to me because, see, these jobs numbers, and I really feel that these jobs numbers are not going to improve moving forward. I mean, even they said that the percentage of cash of these companies, Apple and a lot of the other big ones like Microsoft, they have like almost 35% of their cash that were sitting just not doing anything in banks overseas. That's not, because it's not here.
Well, also, if you look at what companies, under their guidelines, they have to hold it in cash and marketable securities. And most of those companies are holding cash in US Treasuries. So what's going to happen when those companies decide to spend their cash? They're going to have to sell US Treasuries.
Right.
So that's going to put pressure on the Treasury markets. Everybody thinks that as soon as the companies start to spend their cash, that our problems are over. Well, if the companies start selling treasuries and stop buying them, now you've got another problem because who's going to buy U.S. treasuries when 61% of U.S. treasuries were bought by the Federal Reserve last year, which means that the government spends money and relies on the Federal Reserve to buy the debt that it incurs in spending the money.
I know you brought up an interesting point. I was actually going to talk about that later in the show, is that the Federal Reserve does indeed, last year, they purchased a stunning 61% of the total net treasury issuance, which is up from really negligible amounts in 2008 or prior to the 2008 financial crisis. So, while it seems like, Lewis, this kind of goes back to what you and I talked about, the United States appearing to be maybe the better place to put your money, but we're really not. I mean, we have what's going on over in Spain now, which is basically just a reenactment of what took place in Greece and is still taking place in Greece. And that's just going to trickle down, I think, Portugal and all the other, probably 7 or 8 other European countries. I don't think that's going to stop. That's just a contagion that's going to continue to spread. But what the big thing is that when ultimately they have to deal with that over there, it's going to affect us here in the United States.
Oh, sure it is. And if you look at the United States debt issuances, up to about 20, 30 years ago, most of it was purchased domestically by U.S. citizens and U.S. companies. Then Japan and China got an appetite for the debt. They've since lost that appetite, and but the federal government hasn't stopped spending money. In fact, in the last few years, they've increased their spending, and the Federal Reserve is the one who buys it.
Right.
So that means that there is not a natural market for U.S. Treasuries other than the Federal Reserve buying those Treasury issuances and artificially keeping the price down. Because if the Fed was not buying the debt, the United States would be in serious trouble and would have to raise interest rates in order to attract investors.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point, I think the United States wouldn't have a choice but to go bankrupt at that point because, we're just, continuing to extend the supply of money to prevent anybody from having to make any tough decisions.
That's why they're doing it, because the interest on the debt would be too unsustainable.
Yeah, and for a lot of people out there, you're trying to piece these pieces of the puzzle together. One of the reasons why we've had such low interest rates for the last year or so since last autumn is because the Federal Reserve, they're buying these U.S. Treasuries. They're also buying a lot of mortgage-backed securities. This is something that's not sustainable. I guess the Federal Reserve, in essence, could continue to buy this stuff, but for how long? And at some point, they're going to have to pull their money back out of it. When that happens, interest rates will rise, and they will rise rapidly, as we saw about a week and a half ago. It's interesting because, these problems with Spain pop back up, and it's the flight of safety, the money going back out of stocks and back into what people feel are the safe havens of bonds in the United States and United States Treasuries. But ultimately, at some point, we're going to see a massive spike when a lot of people start to realize that, the United States is in worse position than the European countries are at this point in time. And I highly recommend, and we've talked about this, Lewis, over and over again, that if people are out there willing and able, they have the ability to purchase a home or refinance at pretty much the lowest interest rates in history right now, that you should take advantage of it. Don't gamble, because every day it seems like that there's, whether it's a jobs number, whether it's the Fed speaking, which I believe the Beige report comes out this week, which will give all of the Federal Funds Board members, it'll give kind of their views of where we're at and give a report on the overall economies. And there's a lot of people that don't agree with what Bernanke's doing. There's some people that do agree with Bernanke. Some people that feel that Bernanke's not doing enough. I believe it was Krugman, wasn't it?
Krugman came out and said we need more inflation. The Atlantic had Bernanke on the cover and called him the hero. So there are people out there that are, even though we've just outlined how indebted the United States is, are arguing for more QE3 and more stimulus. And Krugman's argument is, money is cheap. We should borrow it while we can. And I view that as, a guy has 20 beers the night before. And he paid $5 a pop at the bar. And Krugman's over there telling him in the morning when he's hungover, well, look, beer's $1 now. You should go get more.
Right.
This is kind of ridiculous that they want to pile more debt onto more debt, either through more money printing in QE3 or further stimulus to stimulate the economy. And so far, that hasn't worked anyway.
Yeah, and it's always, and I believe Krugman in that article actually pointed out that they should only be really concentrating on their first of the two-part mandate, which is to try to make sure that we have a full employment here in the United States, or close to it, as close as they can get. But by printing more money, that's not going to help the overall economy. It's not. And what's
going to happen is you'll still be out of a job, and you'll pay even more for food and energy.
Right, and they always refer to that, the core number, which strips out everything, and you have that, and then you have all the other articles that are talking about how much gas prices are going up and how that affects people. I believe that there was an article saying, kind of what the average American family pays for, a husband and wife that are both working, of somewhere around that's driving about 15,000 miles per year at 20. I want to say it was probably an average that their cars would get 22 miles per gallon, would equate to about $4,100 a year spent out on just gasoline. Now, that number's not even accurate, because that's post-tax earnings that they're having to spend that money on, right? So really, if you factor in and tax rate somewhere around 25%, they could be paying over $5,000 a year just out in gasoline. Now we're not even talking about food, which obviously food goes hand in hand with what the gas prices are doing.
Right, and the less money you make, the larger percentage these two items, gas and food, make up of your overall family budget, and it certainly squeezes you.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people out there are definitely feeling that squeeze. And the interesting part is that, this whole low interest rate environment, it would be great if it was, that's exactly what got us into the mess to begin with, was when Greenspan had kept interest rates low for an extended period of time. The only difference between now and then was that there were all those programs out there that allowed all of the Americans to be able to take advantage of the credit. Now credit has basically is really restricted, and it's almost impossible to get a loan for most people. To give you a prime example, I had a client that I spoke to the other day, has probably $1 million in an asset account. They own 3 other properties outright. They're renting all of them out. They're a self-employed business. Okay, so they probably expense a lot of their stuff, so their adjusted gross might not be that great. They were trying to refinance a property, 2 different banks. I can't remember the names. They were larger banks at probably a 50% loan to value. So their loan was 50% of what their house is worth right now. And they have been basically tinkered around with by these banks for the last 4 months. Can't get a loan. Now, logic would think that, they've got almost the money in the bank to cover that loan, and they still cannot obtain a home loan. So
the banks aren't making money in issuing loans at these low interest rates.
Yeah, and that's why they put these very restrictive guidelines, and it makes it pretty much impossible, next to impossible, to get a loan. We're coming up on a break. When we come back, will the Fed elect for QE3, and what does that mean for interest rates? When we come back.